So today we're going to tackle a huge question. In a world that's just overflowing with information, how do we figure out what's actually true? We're going to explore this really interesting new framework called the Consensus Verification Protocol. It's a totally new way of thinking about what's real.
And, this question, it feels more urgent every single day, right? We are surrounded by these incredibly convincing deepfakes and all this AI-generated content. So how can we be sure that what we're seeing or hearing or reading has any connection to reality at all? It's a real problem.
And this problem, it actually has a name, the information crisis. The source material for this explainer puts it in a really vivid way. We're all swimming in a huge, disorienting sea of synthetic media. And let's just sit with that phrase for a second, because it is so important. This isn't just some temporary glitch or a passing trend. The whole idea we're exploring today is built on this pretty stark premise. We are facing a permanent pollution of our information ecosystem. That's not a small thing to solve. It's a fundamental change to our world.
So what are these pollutants exactly? Well, we're talking about deepfakes that can create believable but completely false videos. We're talking about AI hallucinations, where these models just confidently make things up. And then there's a whole range of other synthetic media, all designed to mimic, to manipulate, and to distort reality.
So if our information world is permanently polluted, how do we even begin to navigate it? Well, here's the thing. Our old maps, our old tools, they're just not working anymore. And that brings us to the limits of what we call source authority.
This probably feels familiar, right? I mean, for generations, this was pretty much our model for truth. If a trusted source, a teacher, a textbook, a famous institution said it, then that was that. It was true. A simple top-down system that honestly worked fine for a simpler time.
And this slide just lays out the shift we need to make so clearly. On the left, you've got that old model, a single, trusted source just handing truth down. But look at the right. That's the new model of network validation. Truth isn't just given to you anymore. It's something that gets established through a decentralized, verifiable process of connection.
So, if that old top-down model is broken, what comes next? Well, this brings us to the core solution, the Consensus Verification Protocol, or CVP. And the big idea here is a complete pivot, a shift away from being obsessed with the final answer and instead focusing on the process.
So what is the CVP thing? At its heart, it's a framework where the validity of a claim isn't based on who said it, but on the transparent, checkable path you took to get to that conclusion. Just think about that for a second. In this new world, the journey really does matter more than the destination.
And this introduces a really powerful new principle for how we learn. See, learning is no longer about just passively memorizing facts from one source. Instead, learning becomes the active process of triangulation, of cross-referencing, checking, and validating information from a whole bunch of independent points.
Okay, so that's the theory, and yeah, it's a pretty big one. But how does this actually work in the real world? Let's try to ground this concept by looking at how CVP could work in a place like a classroom by grading the path.
In a classroom that uses a CVP model, a student isn't just graded on getting the right answer. That's the old way of thinking. Here, the entire focus shifts to the quality, the rigor, and the transparency of their verification path, the documented trail of connections and evidence they use to get to their conclusion.
So what does that path actually look like? Well, here's a pretty simple breakdown. First, you come across a claim, any piece of information you want to check out. Second, you identify your verification nodes. These are the sources, the data, the logic you're going to use to test it. Third, and this part is absolutely key, you meticulously document the path. You record every single step of your investigation. And finally, you don't just land on a simple true or false. Instead, you determine a probability of truth based on how strong your evidence is.
And these nodes, they're basically just the building blocks you use for verification. They can be anything from primary source documents and raw data to simple logic checks, or even finding a consensus among a bunch of independent experts. You're not just looking up a single fact anymore. You are literally building a web of evidence.
This table just nails the difference, doesn't it? The primary focus shifts from the final answer over to the verification path. The core skill we value is no longer just memorization, but this active triangulation. And the final output isn't just one correct answer, but a fully documented process that anyone can look at, question, and check for themselves. It is a complete rewiring of what we even consider work.
So what does this all mean for the big picture? Let's zoom out for a second and explore how this could redefine not just learning, but our entire concept of knowledge itself. This isn't just some philosophical idea pulled out of thin air. It's actually grounded in real-world science. CVP pulls from things like network theory, which is the mathematical study of how stuff is all interconnected. And it's basically the next evolution of media literacy. You can really think of it as information literacy 2.0, built for our modern, networked world.
And here's an analogy that I think really clicks in today's world. Under CVP, knowledge becomes something like a cryptographic process. You're not just accepting a fact because someone told you so. You are actively verifying a block of truth by checking the work, a lot like how a blockchain verifies transactions. Truth becomes something we prove, not just something we're told.
So, we'll leave you with this final thought, which is really the heart of this whole idea. What happens when we stop searching for the one right answer, and instead we start validating the path? What happens to our society, to our education, to our own understanding of what's real when we make that shift? It's a huge question, and honestly, it's one we're all going to have to figure out, and probably sooner than we think.